jumping back and kind of continuing on with our journey into JavaScript's version of classes. JavaScript does have a new keyword. You will see the new keyword in many languages. I don't believe Python has one because in Python we can just do person, or let's call them Alice equals person, and create a new person. In JavaScript, the new keyword is a little weird, and we don't use it a ton. And kind of the key thing to remember is that there's like this empty object that JavaScript will give us for free. And the name of that object is this. And that's because Alice already exists. So we were at Eve. How about Frank? So what ends up happening here, let me just commenting out the stuff that we're not looking at the moment to make our print statements a bit cleaner. So this is honestly pretty weird. We create a function, we don't return anything. When we use the new keyword, and again, VS Code is actually kind of amazing because it's showing my comment. So if I had like real documentation, then VS Code would be great. I actually didn't know that it did that. And again, VS Code is using TypeScript to infer all of this information about what our stuff is, but JavaScript doesn't have any of that. This new keyword returns this context. And in this case, it's an object. And honestly, all of that is really kind of strange. Because it's just a function, but it's this weird special behavior. And if we don't use the new keyword, we get undefined. And this is another reason why classes in JavaScript are very limited. What JavaScript does have is something called the prototype chain. And it's pretty weird. It's cool, but it's also weird. And I think, again, I am going to just briefly leverage the MDN JavaScript documentation, and then we'll see some code. And so I think you folks are probably starting to infer this, but for anything HTML and JavaScript and CSS related, the place you want to go to is the Mozilla developer network web docs. I think MDN stands for Mozilla Developer Network. Mozilla is a nonprofit. They created the browser Firefox. Just to give a little history lesson, way back when there was a browser named Netscape. In the early days, that was a competitor to Internet Explorer. JavaScript was invented at Netscape. Netscape went out of business and the Mozilla Foundation was created, and Netscape kind of transformed into Firefox. So there's this sort of open source lineage, and Firefox is like sort of the open source browser. Open source meaning if I wanted to, there is a Firefox GitHub repository somewhere and I can see all the code for it, and the licenses, the legal licenses let me do stuff with it. The point of all that being, for anything JavaScript, HTML, CSS related, start here. I'm sure folks have seen W3 schools. It's not bad. And if I'm learning something and I need a second way to hear something described, I'll go here. But MDN or W3 schools misses stuff sometimes. MDN is much more accurate. It's actually quite readable. So I really recommend it. So like JavaScript does inheritance. It uses something called the prototype chain. Every object has a parent object. Every object has a property called, I want to say, prototype. And let's see if I'm totally off my rocker here. Oh, and I can't use a variable that I already created. I'll show a bit more relevant examples in a moment. Yeah, it might be because let's see what happens if we do person.prototype. Yeah, okay. I think it might be with a function. Let me comment this stuff out very quickly. So this is a little weird, frankly. Person is a function that we assign to a constant. It has a property on that object called prototype that we've never seen before. And prototype here kind of means like, it's sort of equivalent to when we're talking about a parent class with inheritance in Python. Again, this is not critical to know in depth. It is important to know that there is something in JavaScript called like prototypical inheritance and the prototype chain, and that it exists and that it is different from Python and Java and other classic object-oriented languages. What you can do is something like this. Where on this person class, sort of, but not really, because it's JavaScript and because maybe because we're using the, I don't think the new keyword is critical to this. Every object, every function in JavaScript has a property named prototype. And we can use it to point to other objects to do inheritance, and we can kind of hang stuff on top of it. And so now if I do Frank say hello, all of a sudden, because I went ahead and added this property say hello onto the prototype, of this person. I hate to use the word class because, again, it's really not a class. Class, function, objects, JavaScript thing. We have access to it now wherever we have an instance of this person. It is really cool because it's incredibly powerful and flexible. That's probably why people thought it was a good idea at the time. And there probably are cases where it is very useful. And other languages have prototypical inheritance. Pretty much no one uses it when you're writing JavaScript. If you need to know it, it will only be in case it comes up on a technical interview. If you end up going deeper into the language, you might use it if you're writing a library for someone else to use. But it really has been a part, it's like something deep under the hood. It's like the boiler in the basement of the building. No one is going to go there unless something has gone wrong. Or you are the maintenance person. And Darius, I'm just catching up on the chat. I see a mention that you read in a podcast that the prototype isn't used much, but it's used more than this. I would actually say the opposite is true. And let me dive into the friendliest part of object-oriented programming in JavaScript, and the one part that is a bit more relevant because it used to be how we do stuff with React, and it's how a lot of stuff gets done in TypeScript, which is actually creating a class with the word class. And just to give a quick history lesson on this, I think I shared the site Can I Use the other day. A big challenge with JavaScript in the web is that we have different environments, different contexts that we have to target for our JavaScript code to run in. Classes didn't exist until a later version of the JavaScript language called ES6. And as it says here, it's syntactical sugar. At the end of the day, it's just creating objects and functions in the same weird way that we've been looking at with the prototype chain. But you couldn't use the class keyword for the longest time in JavaScript, and it didn't used to exist at all. Now it's pretty standard, and it's pretty friendly. And I already used the variable person, so let's say we'll create a human. Instead of Python's init, we use a method called a constructor, and constructor is the term that you'll hear used most of the time. And here, the this keyword functions a lot like Python self, and we can use it really similarly. And this is a whole lot more readable and sensible than everything else we've seen.
And this is just ES6 and newer.
Correct. Yeah, there's a whole, like for a long time, what happened is the ES6 language specification was created, but browsers hadn't updated them. So people created what were called transpilers, where you could write your JavaScript using the cool new ES6 language feature, the class keyword. A transpiler would transform that into the crufty old JavaScript to go way back in time. Like what a class is where did that module pattern example? Under the hood, that class keyword does this, and people would write transpilers to turn JavaScript with this into JavaScript that looked like that, so it could run in the browser until the browser's caught up, which is wild. we'll make Gina lowercase. Gabo, yes, this does sit better with your brain. Hopefully this looks much more familiar. And I know it was a really long journey to get here. Part of the goal of that journey was really the big thing to take away from today is this looks a lot like when we define a class in Python. It works very differently, even though we can use it almost the same way. And we will not use it a lot, to be honest, when we do JavaScript. And generally, you will not, you may or may not, again, it depends if you use TypeScript, what flavor of React people use. But JavaScript, there's another style of programming called functional programming, like we saw with map and reduce. That's really kind of a functional programming style that, like, there's object-oriented programming and there's functional programming, and those are two like philosophies of how to do it, how to program. They both have value, they both have their place. The JavaScript community, and in a lot of ways, the JavaScript language works better as a functional programming language. Because in JavaScript, honestly, what makes a lot more sense than all this stuff that we've been seeing is you just make an object, you know, name Henry, or even better, you make a constructor. And you know, if you want to, you can add that here with an arrow function. That should work. That did not work because my name is, oh, it's not Henry, it's name. And the key thing here is this doesn't refer to this. And in fact, to make it clearer, let me name this differently. So we have a function, we pass in some data, we create a JavaScript object with the shape and behavior that we want, and we return that. And we have a little sort of factory here, a make person function. And instead of a class and a constructor, JavaScript makes doing stuff like this very easy to do. And you can do a lot of the similar stuff. But what you can't do is inheritance. And there are other strategies that we'll see later when we get into React. You could totally do name. I just wanted to, that's a good question, Michael. I just wanted to change the name of the argument I passed to the function to make it clear that right here, this variable is not this property name, but it's the argument that's getting passed into the function. Because we're not using this context. So there isn't really a way inside this object to get access to this, if that makes sense. And I'm just seeing in the chat, there was a question from Kenneth on line 106. Can we use the class human? Oh, that is totally what I meant to do. I apologize. I totally missed that. So thank you. And next time, if I do that, please just shout it out, because I might miss it in the Zoom chat. That we totally can use the human class. It does the exact same thing, but our code is much more readable. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And I think, let me check in and see what questions people have. Oh, Gabo, so this make person function, we want to pass in the name as an argument. And we want to return an object that has the name as a property. And the reason like we want to do this is for consistency. Like maybe this data is coming from another place. Actually, I'll show a good example with this. And by writing a function that creates this object, we can ensure a consistent structure because we can just, other programmers can just use this function. So here, this argument is named age, and we assign it to the object. Yeah, no, good question. But that actually leads me to a good example. Let's call this people. And let's create an array of people. We had Henry. So how about Ichabod and Jane? People.map make person. And this is where JavaScript gets cool. This is kind of the nice way to use JavaScript. Let me comment out the console logs that we don't need real quick. So this is actually how I kind of like to write JavaScript. And circling back to that map reduce that we saw the other day, we're passing in this function that we defined. We're taking data in one format, putting it through the pipeline of another function and transforming it from some nested arrays into some objects that are a lot nicer to work with. And like if we want to go wild, ages 0 and 1 because I screwed up. That's a very good point. Let's do it like this. And actually this raises a good point. So people.map person array into, actually I'll just call this P for person. I'm not sure exactly. JavaScript tried to get smart and do something. What am I doing wrong here? It's a good question. Asterisks about, or Sebastian about the asterisks. Quite possibly, yes. I have to check with JavaScript. There is an advantage to being explicit when you're writing code, because what if there was something here like your favorite food and we didn't want that? The asterisk might grab everything and that might throw an error. That's a great question about map in Python. And that touches on a really good point that actually someone was asking about during the break. There's a lot of terms, a lot of concept, a lot of jargon, and the terms can get used in different ways and in different ways with different languages. The concepts are the same. And that's the beautiful part. And honestly, I think the key to feeling better about programming and really learning stuff and setting yourself up to do well in technical interviews and for your career is to focus. We got to learn the specifics because we have to go out and build stuff, but the concepts are really what matter, because a year from now, maybe JavaScript changes again and people do it a different way. But the idea of you can write a map function and a filter function and a reduce function, those are computer science concepts that have been around for a while and have implementations in multiple languages and aren't going anywhere. Similarly with object-oriented programming, and Python is a great language to learn object-oriented programming in. Like the idea of classes and inheritance and objects isn't going anywhere. What other questions do people have? And then we can break for lunch. And we should do that too, because actually the TAs and Zainab and myself have a lunch meeting.
Does map return in a brand new, like a whole new object like it did in Python?
Yeah, that's a great question. Map returns a whole new array. What map does is it goes through this array. For each thing in that array, it transforms it somehow and sticks it in a new array. So it, and we haven't seen this notation as much, and I'll duplicate it right here real quick. In JavaScript, it can be a very nice way to write code. This is an array with two things in it. Because our things are other arrays and they're kind of long, putting them on separate lines makes it a little more readable. So here we have an array with two objects inside of it. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, did someone else have a question?
Yeah, just this is a should be a short, a quick one. So in the arrow function there, the P with the arrow make person, that is kind of processing it similar to like when we do the for loop in Python. So that P is kind of like X. So
Exactly.
is that P every like that P stands for every object we're gonna iterate through, correct?
Exactly. What the
Okay.
map function does is it iterates through the array or the list. For each item, it passes in the item as an argument to this function here. And it doesn't have to be like an arrow function. I could do this. This is a bit more work than necessary, but return make person. ARR is short for array. The issue was that the way I wrote this function needed two arguments. And here the array is one thing. So we have to break out each individual item. So I could do that. And instead of this line of code, I do it this way. And then the map will pass in each element as an argument, and that should work. Yeah, and that works as well. So map takes another function as an argument, and it goes through an array and passes each item in the array into that function as an argument. And you're totally right that P here is just a placeholder variable whose name we create for the arrow function. Exactly like X in a for loop, or I, or whatever it may be. Awesome. Let's break simply so that we can make sure that we get to lunch. This was really good. If there are questions we didn't get a chance to look at, please throw them in the questions doc, or just throw them out in Sierra questions, or just Slack us. All are equally valid approaches.